Order. Urgent question, Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Minister for Public Health to make a statement on government plans to reform support for victims of contaminated blood.
The Minister for Public Health, Minister Jane Ellison.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I recognise that I have committed in earlier debates to consult on proposals to reform the current payment schemes before the end of the year. And despite our best efforts to meet this commitment, we are unfortunately not yet ready to publish this before recess. However, I can confirm today that the consultation will be published in January. The delay, I know, will be disappointing for many who are anticipating this consultation before the end of the year. And I do want to apologise for the delay, in particular to those members of this House who have been campaigning tirelessly for a resolution on behalf of their constituents, and of course to those directly affected who continue to wait patiently for our proposals. In the Westminster Hall debate in September, I explained that any consultation would be within the context of the spending review, and payments for the reform scheme would come from the Department of Health's budget. The House will know that the outcome of the spending review was communicated to us only a few weeks ago. The infected blood tragedy and reform of the payment schemes remains a priority for us, and we are currently assessing what can be allocated above and beyond the additional £25 million already committed. And this is, of course, in addition to the existing baseline spend on the payment schemes, which will remain. Over my 2 years, Mr. Speaker, as Public Health Minister, I have regularly heard from those affected by this tragedy. Every week I read a large number of letters, both to me and to the Prime Minister, from campaign groups, from individuals, from their families, all of whom have been affected by this tragedy in different ways. While considering proposals for consultation, I want to make sure all of these views are reflected, and that in particular I don't miss the thoughts of those with the quieter voices. We are currently working towards publication of the consultation, and as part of this, we arranged an independently facilitated event with representatives of some of the leading campaign groups, and the report from this event is available through those groups. I've also worked to keep members of this House updated. Mr. Speaker, you know how seriously I take my duties in this regard. Last month I invited members of the APPG on haemophilia and contaminated blood to a meeting to discuss this. I told colleagues then that my intention was to consult as soon as possible, but did say that this could be in January, given the timing of the comprehensive spending review. As discussed with the APPG then, I'm also interested in the opportunities offered by the advent of simpler and more effective treatments, which have the ability to cure some people of hepatitis C and present a welcome new opportunity to make some people well. I want to assure the House that work continues to establish a way forward and that a consultation will be published in January, and Mr. Speaker, at that time I will seek to make an oral statement. I would like to end by reiterating that it is because it is a priority for me to get this right that I have taken the decision to take a little more time and publish the consultation in January.
Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And your decision to grant the urgent question today is recognition of the long campaign for justice for this group. And this is appreciated by everyone who's been involved. And I have to say to the Minister, I am very disappointed that I've had to ask for this urgent question today. Ministers on 3 occasions promised a statement before Christmas, and they should not have been forced to come to this chamber for the 2nd time this year. And I assume when the Minister talks about a consultation being issued in January, she means January 2016. I would like clarification on that, because dates always seem to slip. Such action from the government fuels distrust and resentment amongst people who have been let down for far too long. And there are 4 questions I would just like to ask the Minister. The Minister is proposing a consultation to run for 12 weeks, which she will need to assess before launching a new scheme. Can she explain how this is now feasible before the start of the next financial year? Secondly, the Minister claimed that this will be the first full public consultation, and I want to press upon the Minister that the APPG ran a full consultation with the same consultees earlier this year. Can the Minister assure me that she has considered the APPG's report and all the evidence presented in it? Thirdly, as the Minister said, the Government delayed making a statement until after the comprehensive spending review in order to determine the total financial envelope available. I understand that currently the Department of Health pays out about £14 million a year, with a total future financial commitment of £455 million. Can the Minister tell the House how much more is now available after the comprehensive spending review? And fourthly, lump sum payments were a key issue raised in response to the APPG inquiry, but it now appears that these are off the agenda. This is a major disappointment. Lump sum payments would allow those affected to make real choices about their own lives, something that they have been denied for far too long. So will the Minister now support a separate request to the Treasury to use funds equivalent to the £230 million raised from the sale of Plasma Resources UK to fund such lump sum payments to those who've been affected?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her response. Of course, I understand the disappointment that we're not able to consult before the end of the year. I did, of course, inform the Honourable Lady and her colleagues who came to the meeting on the 5th of November, I think, at that time, that it was unlikely that we were going to be able to consult before the end of the year. And that was recorded in the note that they made of the meeting and was published through the all-party group. So, Mr Speaker, I have tried to keep colleagues informed. Indeed, only last night I was speaking to a number of campaigners about this, the Honourable Member for Foyle and the Honourable Member for Colne Valley. I informed them about the delay personally and was, of course, going to inform the Honourable Lady today or tomorrow and all the other members who attended the meeting. So I've done my best to keep people informed, Mr Speaker. I understand her point about the consultation. I will look at the point she makes, but I've always been clear that the transition to a new scheme would never, and again this is something we discussed at the meeting we had in early November, that any transition to a new scheme has to be done in a way that doesn't in any way compromise the safety of payments to people in schemes, and therefore I don't see any problem with the issue about consulting and then moving towards transition, because that transition will be a gradual process anyway for some people, because I want to ensure a safe transfer from the current scheme to any reformed scheme. But I don't see a real problem in that regard. This will be the first full consultation by the government. She's right that the all-party group and others, my right honourable friend sat on the Treasury bench, of course garnered many views. So it will be the first full government consultation, but of course all views, including those that were put to the all-party group in their very good report, those can be reiterated as part of the response to the consultation. That will be there for all to do. I've made a statement already about the issue of money, Mr Speaker, in my response to the urgent question, and I understand the point she's making about lump sum payments. It wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment at that time. That will be something that I can talk about more when I make an oral statement at the time we launch the consultation. But of course the principle that she reiterated in her questions to me about individual choice and treating people as individuals, that very important principle that so many members have stressed to me, that is something that we will very much recognise in what we bring forward in the new year.
Jason McCartney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'd like to congratulate the Honourable Lady from Hull North, who I co-chaired the all-party group with in the previous Parliament, for securing this urgent question. Can I also just press the Minister to please use this valuable data that we had in our all-party report? It has real testimony from the victims in how the trusts and funds, whether it's the Macfarlane, Skipton, Eileen or Caxton, just aren't delivering the support day to day the victims actually need, and that when she comes back to the House in January, please can it be as soon as possible and not the last day when we then maybe have to go to another urgent question?
Well, Mr Speaker, my honourable friend who has campaigned very long and hard and very well on this is quite right to reiterate the importance of the views given to that report. They've already informed our thinking. I can confirm that. They have already informed our thinking about how we go forward, as indeed of the views of many colleagues on all sides of the House expressed over many months and years. So I can give him that assurance that that will be considered. And I've previously committed, and I reiterate that commitment today, to a root and branch reform of the current schemes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, for granting this urgent question, and I pay tribute to all the members of this House who have been a strong voice for the victims of contaminated blood, but in particular to my honourable friend, the member for Hull North, who has been tireless in her pursuit of answers. Mr. Speaker, this scandal saw thousands of people die and thousands of families destroyed through the negligence of public bodies. Over the years, the response of governments of all colours just hasn't been good enough. And it is a real shame that we are here yet again wondering why action hasn't been taken. Whilst I don't think anybody doubts the sincerity of the commitment the Prime Minister made back in April, can the Minister understand the disappointment that people have felt in recent months as promises to publish arrangements and to make statements have been repeatedly broken? Does she accept that this has only raised false hope amongst a community that already feels very betrayed? Given this further delay that she's announced today, what guarantees do we have that the January consultation date will be met? And what redress, other than an urgent question through you, Mr. Speaker, will there be if it isn't? And the consultation is fine, but can she say when any new scheme will actually be implemented? It is important that any new arrangements are properly scrutinised, so will she commit to a debate in government time to allow that to happen? And finally, does the Public Health Minister appreciate that the longer that this goes on, the longer we leave in place a system which isn't working and leaves victims without adequate support? Mr. Speaker, no amount of money can ever fully make up for what happened. But we do owe those still living with the consequences the dignity of a full, a final, fair and lasting settlement. This injustice has gone on for far too long. The time for action is now.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've already said that, of course, I regret the delay, but this is a very complex area, and I appreciate the tone in which the Shadow Public Health Minister responded, because, as he said, governments of all colours have not turned to this issue, but we have turned to this issue and we're addressing it in a great deal of detail. It is a complex area. There are a very diverse range of affected groups impacted by this tragedy. We must get the consultation on reform right for all of them. We've been considering the funding issue. I've been clear about that in my response to the urgent question. And of course, we are aware of potential litigation on the scheme as it stands. I can't comment further on this, but the House will appreciate that adds a level of complexity to dealing with this matter. But, you know, Mr. Speaker, I've always been extremely happy to come to the House and explain it. The issue of debates in government time are not a matter for me, but it goes without saying that I will be delighted to not only come and debate this, but I'm always very happy to talk to colleagues, including front bench, shadow front bench colleagues, privately or otherwise, on this matter, and that commitment remains.
Chloe Smith.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Can I echo the spirit of this debate today in that we need to be able to do this job fast and do it well. But could I highlight the tragic circumstances of some of those affected, such as one constituent of mine who has very sadly got iller as we have been debating even these fine details of this scheme. There is no more time to lose.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that point is well made and very much on my mind. When I'm able to say more about the shape of our proposed reform scheme, I hope that my honourable friend will see that we've tried to respond to her concerns and those of many other honourable and right honourable members.
Dr. Philippa Whitford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, the Penrose inquiry was held in Scotland. There hasn't been a UK one. And in response to that, the Prime Minister made his statement about the £25 million transitional payment. These people are waiting a final settlement and compensation for what the NHS did to them. But their suffering goes on. And it was made the statement that the transitional payment would be in this financial year to help these people get to that settlement. So while the consultation is on the final arrangement, we need some action now. The people do need to have access to the new Hep C drugs. Scottish Government have written about support for fuel payments, and we need the transition now. It shouldn't be kicked in the long run.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this certainly hasn't been kicked into the long grass. I've said to the House today that we're going to consult in January. That is my intention. The honourable lady speaks about compensation. I have said this before, but I think it is worth again saying from this dispatch box, we have to be clear that whilst we're working to establish a fair resolution, liability has not been established in the majority of cases, so it's not appropriate to talk about payments in terms of compensation, particularly on the scale that some campaigners and colleagues envisage, and I've been very open about that now for many months. She's right to make the point about treatments and all of those things, and all of those things are part of our considerations as we move forward. Just on the 25 million, I would like to confirm to the House that although it was allocated to be spent in this financial year, it will be carried forward, and the money the Prime Minister announced in March was to support the transition of the scheme, and obviously as we envisaged the scheme beginning to transition in the spring of next year following the consultation, that money will support that, but that money is going to be carried forward.
Craig McKinley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I congratulate the honourable member for Hull North for securing this urgent question? I speak up today on behalf of a constituent, Mr. Steve Diamond, who has hepatitis C as a result of contaminated blood products. Now, he has, although he's in remission, a normal life for him is quite impossible. And I know that there are new drugs and treatments available. Can the Minister assure me that those very advanced new treatments will be available to all sufferers without any restriction? But what is needed here is closure. And I certainly hope, despite this delay, that that closure can be very shortly delivered. This is a big subject in my part of Kent. It's trailed massively in the Kent on Sunday, who are onto this on a regular basis. We need closure, and those affected need some certainty in their lives. Can the Minister assure me of that?
I've corresponded directly with Mr. Diamond's partner, and so I know that the level of suffering that he endures, and of course the issue of treatment, the issue of the new treatments, the very different drug landscape which faces us on hepatitis C infection from even just a couple of years ago is something uppermost in my mind as I look at how we can reform the scheme and how we can support those who suffer.
Sir Gerald Kaufman.
Mr. Speaker, this comes after the shambles of the meeting at the Minister's Department last month, when honourable members from both sides of the House arrived for a stated time, and after waiting were told the meeting was over, and then received an apology from an official promising further information which was never supplied. Does the honourable lady understand what being a minister is? It means being in charge. It means only making a promise if you are certain that you will keep the promise. This has been a travesty, and it wouldn't matter so much if it were not for the sick people, including those in my constituency, who are living lives of hell. They were looking to the government after the promises were made for some kind of alleviation during their lifetimes. They haven't got it.
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I slightly regret the tone that the right honourable gentleman takes. I have to say I'm totally mystified at the point he makes about the meeting. The meeting was organised with the all-party group, with the right honourable lady, his colleague. I think the meeting might have been moved once at the request of the all-party group, and the details and arrangements for the meeting with me were circulated by the all-party group. 6 honourable and right honourable colleagues did attend the meeting, so I'm sorry if there was some confusion, but as I say, I don't think it was on the part of me or my officials, and a number of colleagues came to that meeting. We had a very useful discussion. I've sought to update others since. He is right that we need to move towards some conclusion, but it's also a matter of record that he was at times a member of the last Labour government, which for 13 years didn't move forward on this matter.
Nadeem Zahawi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister will be aware of my frustrations when dealing on behalf of my constituent with the McFarlane Trust. She has the weight of evidence from the consultation that that particular trust is not fit for purpose. Can I just push her a little bit more, and would she confirm that any full and final settlement will not be administered by the McFarlane Trust?
Mr. Speaker, I'm very well aware of the the shortcomings that have been identified by colleagues and indeed by those affected by this tragedy in relation to some of the schemes and that aspect of things. And I've obviously read the details that have come out of the all-party group and other members' communications to me on that. I've confirmed before now that reform of the schemes, looking at that sort of trying to make sure that we don't have so many schemes, all of that will be part of the consultation. So I can certainly confirm to my honourable friend that that point is very well made. I would just add for the record, though, Mr Speaker, that I actually met recently with the staff of the schemes, the people who actually man the phones and deal on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis with some of the sufferers. And I'm quite clear that those members of staff, just distinct perhaps from people who head up trusts or whatever, but those members of staff, many of them are working very hard to offer a service to people in difficult circumstances.
Yeah. Mr Norman Lamb.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Isn't this one of those situations where there is just an absolute moral obligation on the government to act and to end this uncertainty and delay? Is she reassured that the spending review gives her the ability to bring a lasting and fair settlement, and will she do everything she can to ensure that it's in place at the start of the next financial year?
Minister.
Well, I'm very happy to give my former colleague in the Department of Health the assurance that this is taken extremely seriously by the Secretary of State, by my colleagues in the Department of Health. It is a matter on which we're seeking to move forward. It'll be for those who respond to the consultation on the reform scheme, obviously to give their views, but we are seeking to move forward to a reform scheme that responds to the criticisms of the existing schemes and offers sustainability for people who have suffered so long. So I hope I'll be able to satisfy him in that regard, but I'll be able to say more in the new year when we publish the scheme details.
Tom Pursglove.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. One of my constituents, Sue Woffin, is trying to access the Harvoni drug, and this is proving to be incredibly difficult because she hasn't contracted cirrhosis, but she has got an underlying medical condition which is being exacerbated by the contaminated blood. Much is being reported about greater access as of February. Is this indeed the case, and will Mrs Woffin be able to access the treatment that she so desperately needs? I would love a yes or no answer on this. This is incredibly frustrating.
Minister.
Well, I would never give a yes or no answer to the individual health problems of a constituent. I don't know, and I'm not a clinician. But if the honourable member would like to write to me, I can certainly make sure I give an individualised response. But ultimately, the right clinical route for any one individual will be, at the suggestion of their consultant hepatologist. Obviously, NICE very recently, towards the end of November, published new guidelines on 3 more drug treatments. So the drug landscape in terms of hepatitis C is changing very rapidly. And as I say, I'm very happy to make sure that honourable members are sort of fully informed. I've said before in a previous debate on this issue that if people are concerned that their constituents aren't aware of what is out there and don't feel that they're getting support to access things in line with NICE guidance, that we can offer some advice to members on how they can make sure that happens. But I'm very well aware of the general point he makes.
Catherine West.
Mr Speaker, will the Minister clarify whether individuals affected by this terrible scandal will receive individualised letters? How will they know that this consultation is opening next month?
Minister.
Well, obviously my officials have been given considerable thought to how we do that. I mean, a number of people are already members of the existing schemes, and so we have a means to communicate. But we know from previous experience where we've followed up on recommendations made by previous inquiries, and indeed the one recommendation made by the Penrose inquiry, we make exhaustive efforts to inform everybody, and in particular, obviously, those people who've had a lump sum payment but aren't a member of the current scheme. We will make exhaustive efforts to inform people by every means possible, and of course members of Parliament can be of great assistance in that regard.
Mr Peter Bone.
Mr Speaker, going back to the issue of medication, constituents in my constituency want to know the answer to this question. Drugs that are available that haven't been yet approved by NICE but can be prescribed are not being prescribed locally on financial grounds. Surely that is wholly unacceptable.
Minister.
Well, the NHS is currently working on is currently looking at its response to the most recent NICE guideline, which was very recent indeed. I think the 25th of November from memory. So obviously we've got that yet to come in terms of that particular response to the new treatments. The previous treatments that have already been given a NICE guideline, the NHS does have commissioning arrangements in place. But I'm very happy if my honourable friend would like to contact me separately. It would be useful to know the particular situation his constituent might find themselves in, and we might be able to give some helpful support.
Jim Shannon.
Speaker, I thank the Minister for her statement. Brian Carberry from County Down contracted hepatitis C from contaminated blood back in July of this year. Compensation is all very important, Minister, but the really important issue for them is not really enough when it comes to when it's health related. Can the Minister indicate what discussions she's had with the Northern Ireland Health Minister, Simon Hamilton, to tackle this issue?
Well, my officials are working very closely with all the devolved administrations, their opposite numbers in devolved administrations, and obviously as we move towards publication of the consultation, I would be looking to communicate directly with opposite numbers in the devolved administrations and pick up all of these points.
Mr. Kevin Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know the Minister from a State will appreciate the frustration that constituents of mine who have been waiting for an outcome for some decades now will feel at another delay. Given the comments she's made on transitional funding being carried over, can she give me a clear idea of when she expects the new system to be in place?
Well, Mr. Speaker, obviously we aim to consult, and we want to make sure that the final shape of the reform scheme is informed by that consultation. I've said before that we would be looking to start to transition to a reform scheme in the spring, but at this stage it's a little bit difficult to be more precise than that. But we're working hard to make sure that aspects of that transition are already being planned and thought about. But as I say, that will be informed by the final outcome of the consultation.
Margaret Ritchie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister wrote to me on the 6th of November when she stated, "The shape and structure of a new scheme will be decided following the consultation process that will begin by the end of this year, as previously committed and as was committed in the adjournment debate on the 9th of September. I am deeply disappointed today that we don't have that scheme or don't have that consultation. My constituent, Brian Carberry from Downpatrick in South Down, whom I had the adjournment debate about, has told me in the last few weeks that he has now got a form of cancer and 4 tumours have been identified as a result of the connection with contaminated bloods. Will the Minister give me an undertaking and give an undertaking to the House today that a full and final settlement will be in place before the end of this financial year?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've already made my comments about the timing of the consultation. I can't add to what I've said in my response to the Honourable Lady who brought the urgent question. And, of course, I've spoken often and responded to debates from the Honourable Lady. I think the language that she uses is language that previous to this exchange, I have said that I've said what I've said about the issue of compensation. I've said the principles we're going to try and apply to the reform scheme. So I can't really add to the comments I made in response to the Honourable Lady for Kingston Hill North.
Mr. Andrew Slaughter.
Could I challenge the Minister on the phrase quieter voices that I've heard her use several times now? It seems to be a code for addressing the important but less costly issues of treatment and reform of the current schemes, rather than a full and final settlement to what Lord Winston rightly called the worst treatment disaster in the history of the NHS. We do have a moral duty here, and just saying the Chancellor won't give me the money won't wash.
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, I mean, I've made that point clear. I've said already here today, and I've said previously in Westminster Hall, what I believe the position is in regard to compensation. I accept that the Honourable Member has a different view, and we had an exchange about that when he came and contributed to the discussion in November. But I think it would be wrong to use the phrase to dismiss the idea of listening to quieter voices. I have had the opportunity to do that over the last couple of years, and there's also and it is clear that there are a number of people who want a number of different things from a reform scheme. It is not going to be possible to do everything that everyone wants. We are going to try and respond as best we can with a scheme that is sustainable and fair to all, and responds to many of the points that have been made here today.
Alison Thewlis.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for bringing this question. I had a constituent only on Friday at my surgery who wished to raise a number of issues on this very topic, and she will be most disappointed at this further delay. Could I ask that the Minister, if she hasn't done this already, take up the issue of continuing to have assessments by the DWP? My constituent feels it is extremely strenuous that she has to continue to prove her case in order to qualify for benefits. She also found, and she cannot be unique in the country among this, that the treatment she found at the hands of the NHS was not the most sensitive of treatments, and she wished perhaps that some guidance could be issued on that for healthcare professionals.
Well, Mr Speaker, I thank the Honourable Lady for those comments. I will reflect on them, and obviously matters to the DWP are outside the remit of the Department of Health. But of course, those general issues are all points that I'll sort of take on board and can refer to colleagues on. And as I say, we do continue to work with the devolved administrations on this. Matters for the NHS, assuming her constituent is being treated in Scotland, obviously a devolved matter for the Scottish NHS.
Jonathan Reynolds.
Speaker, I appreciate the contrite tone of this question, but it is just so very disappointing. My constituent affected simply wants to be able to buy a home to offer security to his family. He hasn't got that availability to him at the minute. Can the Minister say, can I tell my constituent that next year there should be a new scheme in place which he'll be eligible to receive support from?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, it's clearly my intention that next year we should have a reform scheme in place. I don't know the circumstances of his constituents, so I can't make that sort of individual commitment. But I have said that we want to move next year to a reform scheme. And I understand the frustration of members opposite, but you know, as I think the gentleman speaking as the Shadow Public Health Minister acknowledged, governments of all descriptions and all shades have not stood up and tackled this issue, and we're going to try and do something. I know it won't satisfy everyone, but I hope that we will be able to come forward with a scheme that will actually respond to many people's concerns.
Chris Stevens.
Mr Speaker, and I too thank the member for Hull North for raising this question. The Minister will recall at the meeting I attended on the 5th of November there were two main things discussed. Firstly, the setting up of a contingency fund rather than relying on the spending review every year. Could she confirm that she's written to the Treasury? And secondly, will the consultation consider the issue of family members who've lost loved ones due to contaminated blood?
Well, Mr Speaker, I've already covered the issue of funding in my statement in response, and yes, the honourable member of course came to the meeting and we considered a number of things there and discussed them, and as I say, I don't think I can add really to what I've already said. This is a priority for the Department of Health, and we are seeking to identify the amount of money on top of the transitional 25 million and on top of the baseline spend on the current scheme that we can use in supporting the reform scheme.
Mike Kane.
6,000 infected, 2,000 dead, a 30-year struggle. This delay is just one part of the continuing nightmare that these victims face. Can the Minister tell my constituents, Fred Bates and Peter Mossman, when this nightmare will come to an end?
Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I can't right the wrongs of 30 years, but I can only try and do what I can do in the circumstances that we have, in the money that we will allocate to this. We will bring forward our plans for a reform scheme, and I invite him and his constituent to respond to that. I have to look to the future and say, what can we do going forward to support people in a reform scheme, and in particular, how can we respond to some of the circumstances that are new, some of the ways in which the circumstances we address this terrible, difficult tragedy in, some of the ways in which the circumstances have changed, and make sure that our response reflects those new changed circumstances.
Mark Durkan.
The Minister may recall that when the all-party group met her in early November, we did warn that any slippage on this would be greeted as slipperiness by people who have suffered delays too long. does she understand that people will be worried that the extra time has been taken to make sure that there is a more controlled consultation with options being sealed off? And would she address the underlying question that people want to ask, why, if liability could be admitted by the Irish Health Service based on the fact that the risk was known, can liability not be admitted on the part of the NHS and compensation be forthcoming?
Payments that were made by the Republic of Ireland are obviously a matter for them, and they were in response to the circumstances in Ireland relating to the use of blood products, and this is something we've covered before in debates. I of course understand the honourable gentleman's frustration. I spoke to him last night informally to alert him to the fact that there was some delay, but I do reiterate the point that it is better to come forward with a scheme which we've had a chance to put more effort and a little bit more detail around, rather than, for the sake of a few weeks, rush out something which doesn't give people any real sense of what's being consulted on. So I think the delay, although frustrating, and I've acknowledged that a number of times, Mr. Speaker, although frustrating, I think it will give rise to a better and more meaningful consultation.
Drew Hendry.
Mr. Speaker, the victims are clearly identified and they're well overdue a final settlement. Weeks ago in this chamber I asked the Government if they would provide additional support for victims through this winter, because it may be mild here but it's not mild everywhere, and many are suffering from fuel poverty. It's Christmas. Given the ever-stretching time that this is taking to resolve, will the Minister now commit to providing that support? She has been asked by the Scottish Government to do that. Will she commit to it now?
Mr. Speaker, this matter has obviously been raised with me by the Health Minister from Scotland, and I intend to respond to Shona Robertson in the next few days. I know that the Northern Ireland and Welsh administrations are actually still considering this and have not fed back to me on Shona Robertson's proposals. I did raise it with the members who attended the all-party group meeting in early November. There was at the time a relatively limited interest in the proposal, but obviously I will respond to Shona Robertson in the next couple of days.